Today, let's understand the fourth technique of Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. It's another simple technique related to the breath. Beware of the breath when it stops. Here the verses talks about the pure and impure. They say it is difficult for the impure. And then when comes who is pure? So, the pure one doesn't need a technique. Basically, it's when we study yoga, we understand. Chitta vritti nirodha. When we have all the realm of the mind is taken care by viveka, the discriminating faculty, if that is born in you, we call it as third eye. We see the world differently. If that is born in you, then you can be called as pure one and you don't need a technique. But let's understand what is impure one here. You're driving a car and suddenly you feel the car is going to hit. There's a truck coming in right in front, which is out of control. Your breathing will all of a sudden stop. That is not a time when you think of anything to check your mobile phone, your WhatsApp messages, or anything you're going to check. Everything stops. You cannot breathe in such emergency because you cannot afford it. Everything stops and departs. When the breath is all out and stopped of itself, or down and stopped, in such universal pause, one small self vanishes. It's a self-dissolution. Okay, there is something which you heard of self-realization. So here, after realization, there is a dissolution. You need to dissolve the self. The self gets dissolved here, gets vanished. This small self, what we carry with us every day, is a daily utility. It is not you. It is not us. It's a daily utility. In emergencies, you cannot remember it. This guy, that small self, has to be carried along with us. We carry it. Our memories carry. Buddhi, our information, the enormous amount of information which we collect, we think we are intelligent, from books, from mobile phone, from videos, from external environment, for gurus and so on and so forth. That feeds this tiny self. The tiny self survives because of that. So that is what we call a hankar. So this ahankara, the tiny self, is depending on the memory, samskara, which comes from the generations, and the information which we gather, the pride. So who you are, the name, the bank balance, the nationality, the whole Janam Kundli, what we call it as, is the tiny self. So in the moment where there is a pause, there is an emergency, this guy disappears. So if you can be aware of that moment Now the question comes, how will I be aware that moment? Because awareness and consciousness, the pure consciousness, it goes hand in hand. It's like two wires running together. So, or rather, the best example would be the salt in an ocean. Inseparable. All right, so this technique is usually used by Zen monks. It's very funny, the way the Zen monks use these techniques. The methods are very weird. In the West, they may call it as inhuman also. The human rights may call it as an abuse. But this is how, though it might look absurd, but this is used. Because suddenly a master comes and throws you out of the house. Irrationally, there is no causality. You won't know why he is doing it. Suddenly the master will begin slapping the disciple without any rhyme or reason, without any cause. You are sitting with your master and everything is okay. You are just chit-chatting, and he will begin to beat you in order to create that pause. If there is any cause, the pause cannot be created, because the mind is pretty cunning. It understands it. Wherever there's a cause, there is effect. So the mind works with this cause and effect principle. But the Zen monks very, very well know when to create that pause. Right? If you want to create the cause, if you start abusing the Zen monk, he will never abuse you back. He will laugh at you. He'll smile at you. He'll be full of laughter. And then when you stop, and we don't know when, and suddenly he might come and start beating you. So it's a very tricky technique which is used. If you cannot understand the causality, the mind actually stops, suddenly stops. Either way, if breathing stops, mind stops. If mind stops, breathing stops. If you are appreciating the Zen master, you are feeling good and you are thinking, now the master must be pleased. Like you have been following all the rules and disciplines and the guidelines which has been given there. You probably you think that you impress the master. No, it doesn't work like that. Suddenly he takes his staff and begins to beat you. Maybe he brings one of his colleague also and start beating you. You cannot understand what is happening. The mind stops and there is pause. If you know the technique, you can attain yourself. The tiny self dissolves there, and you know the pure consciousness. So there are many stories where someone attained this Buddhahood because of the teacher suddenly started beating them. So this technique is very well practiced in the Zen monasteries. In the West particularly, in the last 30-40 years, Zen has become very much prevalent. A fashion also. But unless they know this technique, they cannot understand Zen. You will call them as abusive. You will call them as against human rights and so on. So, you cannot pretend, you cannot imitate. It can be dangerous if you just pretend having a Zen studios in the West, the way and they kind of orchestrate this whole drama. It doesn't work like that. So the whole Zen technique is based on this fourth technique of Shiva in Vijnana Bhairava Tantra. But this is very unfortunate that now we need to go and borrow this from Zen, from Japan. But it was very much the quest of Devi to Shiva, and this is how Shiva explains on the fourth verses. So, the pretty simple technique. Any sudden and unexpected, unbelievable thing can create the pause for the impure. But for the pure, so this whole technique is not needed, because he already has realized that self, or rather he has dissolved that self. So if your mind is pure, pure means you're out of these hankering, seeking, desiring, many more things. And your mind cannot be silent. And that is where we call it as impure. The pure one is innocently pure, is simply pure. And for him or her, whenever he is sitting silently, innocently, the breathing stops. It's that simple. Alright, so this is one of the very important technique. We will practice in one of our sessions someday. Alright, enjoy. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat.